Do you want to build an electronic drum or kick tower for under $20? Well, you've come to the right place. Let's check it out.
Get ready to trash the competition with the Junkyard Dominator. Made of solid material because liquid wouldn't cut it. Equipped with a light-duty wood frame because heavy-duty wasn't in the budget. Rising from the ashes of the worst snare drum I've ever played, and equipped with an authentic piezo transducer comes the kick drum experience you never expected to feel this good.
Before we get into the build, I want to take you through some other things I tried out before I ended up building this, and kind of why I needed to. The first thing I tried was reprogramming my MIDI crab, which is an Arduino-based guitar foot switch, an effect switcher. It's got momentary switches, and I was able to rebind these to MIDI notes, and I wouldn't recommend anyone use something like that. The other idea I had was to incorporate a piezo trigger right into the kick pedal. You can check out how well that works. It wasn't fantastic for trigger accuracy. It didn't feel very good to play either, so I abandoned that idea. You could mount it on a standard snare stand, and I did try that out and played with it. It was hard though to get it low enough and at a flat enough angle to really work for a kick drum. So I had to build a stand out of wood. So the drum part of this was actually quite easy for me to do and only took an hour or two. I used a couple of pieces of furring strips, which are 1x4 pine, and I just drilled some holes into the steel shell. And I was careful to measure this as good as possible because it's not adjustable after the fact. I have two of them mounted perpendicular. One of them provides a surface for the pickup and the kick drum pad, and the other is just a support beam. And that also is where I wire the jack to the piezo pickup. For the actual pickup, I had these pre-wired cheap piezo units. You can buy these for a couple of dollars. I did remove it from its plastic housing. I put a small piece of foam under the pickup to isolate it from the rest of the drum, and then a larger piece of foam that I shaped into a rough pyramid on top of that. This is in contact with the mesh head, and that's how it gets picked up. The inspiration for this design was the Roland KD120, which has a larger foam playing surface in the middle, and then a pickup with a foam cone up on top of it near the rim. I also really like the stand design of the KD120, but I don't have the tools to do any metal work. So if you could throw together some kind of metal stand like that, you might have some good results with that. I did not, so I made mine out of wood. So that's basically all there is to the drum. If you look at some acoustic conversion kits, they usually have adjustable hardware, which would be useful for controlling exactly how much pressure the trigger is putting on the head of the mesh. I had already picked out the foam for this, and again, it was just something I had on hand. This is a very thick and rubbery, I think some kind of seat cushion material. I was already planning to use that foam for the kick drum pad, so I made all my measurements based on that. You want the foam to be slightly higher than the surface of the mesh head, so there's tension and contact there. On the topic of trigger sensitivity, it does not work, or it barely works, with my Roland TD1K module. It may be fine on a higher end module. The level from the pickup is so low that the module doesn't really pick it up, and if I crank it up all the way and hit the kick drum hard, it does work, but it does not respond to any real dynamics below that. Now, this isn't an issue for me because I'm running the module into the PC for use with drum software and recording. I use Steven Slate trigger with this drum, and that works really well. It responds perfectly. It's very accurate and sensitive. I've also used the stock Reaper audio to MIDI plugin, and that also works pretty well. It works almost as well as slate trigger, but it's not quite as sensitive, and it's a little harder to dial in the settings just right. So trigger is definitely a great plugin to have for this kind of setup. If I place the trigger closer to the center of the head where the beaters are actually hitting it, it would probably respond just fine. If you've played electronic drums much, you know there's a hot spot around the trigger, and there's some different ways that people try to alleviate that. But in a simple single zone piezo system like this, you're going to get a huge spike in volume right around the trigger, and especially if you hit on top of the trigger. In this design, the beaters are striking just a foam pad, and the trigger is at the top of the drum, so it's getting a much lower level than most electronic drum modules are used to getting. The stand I made out of pine furring strips, and while they're easy to work with and cheap, and I had some on hand, I would really recommend going with a harder wood, like maple, oak, or even poplar, something that's going to hold the screws better and just be more durable. This, as a kick drum, is going to get a fair amount of abuse, and while the pine has held up so far, I don't imagine it will last forever, and it's sort of a little bit looser and more janky than I would like. So I would recommend a better quality wood, or if you can make something out of metal, that would be awesome. I would look at the stand of the KD120 if you want to make something out of metal, or perhaps you could do a similar design out of wood. I designed it this way because it was the least amount of parts and cuts I had to make. It was just simple to construct, and it's mostly durable enough. It hasn't fallen apart. I've used it pretty extensively over the last few months, and it's still fine. I've tightened it up a few times, and some of the screws aren't really grabbing at this point. Overall, the stand was easy to make and has worked, so it's not a bad design. There are a couple of things that could be improved, though. For one, it's not adjustable at all, so you have to measure carefully and make sure that the drum is sitting at the right height so the beaters are striking it right in the middle. You have to get this right, measure carefully, and take into account hardware and other things. One of the main issues I've had is attaching the kick pedal to the stand. I thought I was being clever using an old door hinge, because again, I don't really have the means to do any metal work, and you can't use something like a thin sheet metal because it won't be durable enough for that hoop clamp. Again, that point is going to be one of your main stress points in this whole thing, and kicking the drum a lot over a long period of time, it's going to destroy anything. I originally put the hinge right at the edge of the stand. The problem was the kick tower would flex forward on that hinge. There was nothing making it rigid at that point. So I ended up moving the hinge back so that that flexible joint is on top of the stand. And that made it much more sturdy, though it can still move forward, but it sort of changed the center of balance a little bit, and that mostly fixed that problem. So the kick tower is not coming forward when I hit it anymore. You're also going to want to make sure that you're hitting the drum in the center. This stand isn't the most robust. If I were to just push the drum over, I could probably just rip the whole thing apart relatively easy, but it works because all of the force is going down the center of the drum. So when it's vertical, it's going to want to rotate front and back. If you were kicking at the bottom, it would push the drum forward, and it's going to put a lot of stress on a hardware. But since my beaters are right in the middle, all that force is going there, so even though the connection to the stand is not really that robust, it's not getting that much force applied to it. When I first built the stand, it would have this problem of coming forward. The rebound of the force going through the support legs transferred back forward, which I didn't really anticipate and should have. So besides moving the hinge back to make that connection less flexible, I also added a couple of brackets in the front to sort of give it little feet in the front so that it's less likely to come forward. And now it's pretty stable. It was pretty wobbly when I first built it and not the most fun to play, especially if I was playing fast. It would kind of just start to move around all over the place, and I felt like it was hindering my technique and my playing. So these things with the brackets and moving the hinge back, the hoop clamp, those did fix that. At least with my kick pedal, the axis does not have any sort of rubber that attaches to the hoop clamp, So it's metal on metal, and there wasn't enough friction there to keep the drum from slowly being pushed out of the kick pedal's clamp. Again, the hinge kind of worked out here because it has screw holes, and that gave me a point to attach zip ties. But if you have any better ideas, I'd like to know, because it's really not the best solution, and I'd have to cut the ties to get the pedal off and use it on another kit. Another issue is the connection between the stand and the drum. There were metal screws pressing against metal tension rods, and every time you hit the drum, they made a little squeak. Not a big issue when I'm playing with headphones, but in the room it was kind of silly sounding. I just added a little bit of foam at that connection point so there's not metal on metal rubbing, and that solved that problem. I also secured the piezo jack in the back of the drum by drilling a couple holes and putting in some zip ties there, and that's quite nice now. It was kind of dangling at first. I want to be able to plug the cable in and out without worrying about it and without feeling like I'm going to break any wires, so that's nice. It's perfectly secure back there. I can just shove the cable in and not worry about anything. It doesn't move. Please give me your suggestions or your ideas, or share your own builds with me, because there are definitely ways I could improve on this, and at some point I may build another stand. So I'd love to hear your ideas and see your builds if you do them. You can come join me over on my Discord server, where you can share pictures and drawings of things. Show off your builds there. Show off your music. Download my IRs, other Reaper materials. So I hope to see you over there. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. It helps me out, and it's free to you. And I will see you in the next video.